We made this.
Welcome to the Starlight Ballroom. Hey.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Shipwrecked Comatose, the Crimson One podcast on the We Made This Podcast network. My name is Kurt North, and we are here for another Series 5 episode coverage of the main show. Joining me, as always, is Mark Adams. Mark, how are you?
Hello, I'm all right. That was a very nice, happy greeting. I'm glad.
It was, yeah. I mean, I might be contagious. I don't know yet. I might have some sort of virus, but we'll see. And joining us is our very own Mr. Flibble. We have Matt Latham. Matt, how goes it?
I'm good. I'm so glad that I've never had to have the experience of quarantine, or that none of us have had to have the experience of quarantine.
Now, can you imagine being stuck in your own house for 30 plus days? You know, it must be horrendous. No idea what that's like.
Actually, sounds like this actually sounds like a nice peaceful few days, to be fair.
Yeah. It depends who you're with, I suppose. Depends who you're with. So this week we are looking at the Red Dwarf episode, Series 5, Episode 4, and that is Quarantine. It was written by Rob Grant and Doug Naylor and directed. Do you know who it was directed by, people?
Rob Grant and Doug Naylor?
It was directed by Grant Naylor.
Okay.
They went as they went as their term as Grant Naylor because this is where Juliet May parts company. That she was meant to do this episode, and with everything that's gone on behind the scenes, she actually left. So it was up to Rob Grant and Doug Naylor to do this episode. It originally aired on the 12th of March, 1992.
Sorry, Grant Naylor sounds like a really crap porn star name.
He's not wrong.
Grant Naylor.
Grant Naylor. Nail on.
No, nail her, as in that's the inflection.
Nail her. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry, Mark. It's usually you that brings down the tone of the podcast.
Rude.
You're stepping on his toes. Right. So this wasn't the original idea. The original idea for the episode. This wasn't actually written or was in the making when they started filming Red Dwarf 5, and the original idea was that the crew would get psi powers, things like telepathy, telekinesis, all of that kind of thing. And it was the first draft was actually called Psi-Man. So thinking later on to this episode in Quarantine, where Rimmer is able to move the axe and things like that, is that an episode you'd like to see, Matt? Something like that, more of they get some superhuman powers that they can do telekinesis and stuff, and how do you think that would have fared compared to, say, something like Quarantine?
See, you're telling me that I'd have to have an episode that I regard as one of my favourites not existing over another one.
Yeah. It doesn't have to necessarily exist. It could coexist. In an alternative universe, there's another episode out there which has used elements of this episode, because they didn't really focus too much on the telekinesis stuff. It's more of an idea that was parked, wasn't it? It's there, but it's not really looked at in any depth. So if you had an episode where you could have psi powers,
I mean, I think I don't know. It probably seems to be like a tertiary thing to a main plot. So it depends what it's probably dependent on how and the why and the situation around it. Because I think you can't just have like the crew gets powers. There's usually something around that. Like, for example, like the crew loses a key aspect of their emotion, but then the anchor is the polymorph, or the crew become cowboys. There's other anchors to it. I mean, it probably good to see. I mean, like, technically they do kind of get special abilities in the Gunman the Apocalypse, but that was in a virtual reality thing. I don't know. It's a really tough question to answer. I mean, I don't know. I don't know why it's a tough question to answer, to be fair.
I mean, there's an episode in Dave where they do touch telepathy, which we won't talk about because Mark hasn't seen, but that's an interesting way of doing it. But I'm just thinking, okay, so let's change the question a little bit. If you were to get either or telepathy or telekinesis, which would you prefer?
Telekinesis.
Yeah, I'm telekinesis too.
Why?
Because I'm a lazy fuck.
Because it's just cooler. I think if someone else had telepathy, I could use that power because they could talk to me in my mind. Whereas telekinesis, if someone else had telekinesis, I couldn't use it.
Yeah.
But then I don't know if I want unfiltered access to people's thought processes.
It is a bit rapey, actually, telepathy, isn't it?
Yeah, there's a particular episode, film, Star Trek Nemesis, which deals with that a little bit. It's like, ugh. Yeah, so that was what it could have been. It was meant to be a cost-cutting episode so that it could, with everything that's happened during Terraform. But we got Quarantine. So what do we generally think about Quarantine? First of all, Matt, I'll go to you. Is it one of your favourites of the show as a whole, or how do you feel about it?
It is. This is one of my favourites, and it was a joy to rewatch because I was rewatching like the series as a whole, pretty much on Netflix a few months ago. And one of the big things I really liked about it, which dates quite well, is that I'm very surprised at how much it hinges on the continuity of the rest of the series up to that point. I mean, there are parts of it that come into play in Series 8, but the plot, the general plot and the the characters are kind of defined by frustrations of things that have happened in previous episodes. So you've got your normal situation of the episode, but then the characters drive the plot. So it's Rimmer's actions that drive the plot, but his motivations are fueled by ongoing frustrations of stuff previous episodes. This episode is pretty much the main what's the word? I've forgotten the word. The main conflict of the episode is born over the ongoing Space Corps joke. So basically, the running gag becomes an actual conscientious point for Rimmer, and it highlights his kind of smarminess. It's like kind of I've forgotten the word I'm thinking of. Bloody hell. What's the word I'm thinking of? Pettiness. He's quite petty in terms of how he deals with the situation. So he kind of has his kind of psychological revenge on the crew, which then actually makes it. But then an external factor makes it worse. And I really like how much it kind of works on the history of the show and how it kind of capitalizes on that. And I think it has some very loose sense of continuity, and sometimes it kind of forgets its own continuity at times. But like, for example, again, not much spoilers. I mean, the Dave shows kind of recapture that because it's got a more modern sense of storytelling. But I was generally surprised at how much this builds on kind of tensions of like previous episodes in a way that I don't think Red Dwarf has done before.
Mark, I think what you were saying now, and we talked about this briefly last week with just gags or reoccurring things happening. So you mentioned about the Space Corps director, for example, or the rocket pants things happened. It seems to be that there is more of honing in this idea of, actually it seems to be like almost fully formed, and Quarantine is a great episode for that. I mean, what do you think to that, and what do you think to this episode?
I love this episode. I think as a youngster, the idea of the very kind of self-conscious and smarmy, smug character ending up in a frock appealed to me when I was 12 or 13, But beyond that, I think it's very, very clever in the way that Matt says it does kind of take all these tiny little threads and weave them into something that didn't need to happen, but the series is so much better for it.
Just from a slightly different take on it, as the episode itself, rather than anything around it, is for me what stood out to me on this latest watch is especially with what we discussed last week with Terraform, in that Terraform had those two big set pieces at the beginning, and it took a while to get to Rimmer and actually the story. And we've had that happen in the past. This one is clearly a 3-act structure. You've got the space station stuff first. You get the quarantine aspect, and then you get the finale kind of, the rush to the end to try and stop, the villain as such. So it's very clear in its 3-act structure as well. And I think as an episode, it's quite an easy one to show somebody. I mean, would you show, like, for example, when you had the special mark, would you show this to a potential newbie? Would you show this episode, or do you think there's too much has gone before it? Matt, how would you think about that as well? So, Mark first, do you think this is an episode you could throw on and show somebody, and this is what Red Dwarf does best?
I stuck to the Right in the Childhood format of picking the first episode and your personal favourite, or the one that's most highest rated on IMDb. But with hindsight, that's not necessarily a perfect format with regards to Red Dwarf, because there is in Gunman of the Apocalypse, which is my favourite, which is what I showed to Fraser, there is a kind of, you need to know what's going on previously in Red Dwarf, and I did have to explain that to him. Whereas I think this, you can get away with, you've got a sci-fi crew, and something happens, and you don't really need any background. So maybe I should have picked this. I didn't, and I'm glad I didn't, because Gunman's best.
So, Matt, just from that, I mean, bearing in mind the character work in this as well, do you think it is still accessible from that aspect, from that viewpoint?
I was going to say no, but as Mark was talking, I think the show kind of does. I think the episode does make a good case of the characters, so the dialogue isn't too exposition-y to feel like it's revisiting stuff. So if anyone's seen this for the first time, you can kind of get a sense of the character dynamics. So when Rimmer is obviously really cheesed off about the latest Space Corps directive he gets wrong and challenges Crichton, the episode kind of is able to do that in a standalone fashion, but it feels like it's a good payoff for those who are binging the series on Netflix. So what?
Not for much longer.
Yes. Or, well, just doing a binge on it in general. But I think it's. Then I think it's good to watch, and I think it's also rewarding on a rewatch when you watch the show in order as well. So
yeah. Well, let's dive in then, because as I say, it's a fairly straightforward 3-act structure in the way that it's done. We start on this snow, planet, as such, blizzard conditions and all kinds of things. And for an episode that's trying to cut down on costs, I think the model work on that and the scouter is an interesting thing in itself, because in this episode alone, we've got a scout ship and an escape pod, which Rimmer uses to get back to Red Dwarf, or the Crimson one, as he says. I think he says the Crimson short one, doesn't he? That this introduction to this, and it's using some of the imagery as well that we've had with Crichton last episode, with the the resolution stuff with the scouts going to the ship, and obviously we then go back on Starbug. So what we thoughts, Matt, to this opener, this kind of like the adventure to this barren planet?
Yeah, I think I quite liked how it opened. It cuts directly to the plot. Feels like it's moving. It's not as in media res as the previous episode was, but you still get the sense that life is happening, and you kind of cut directly into it. And as with it being a 3-act structure, it eventually does feel like it's part of an A plot rather than the kind of, as you mentioned last week, the Simpsons flip of an episode. So I quite like how the opening kind of feels more cohesive than last week anyway.
Mark, I mean, the opening kind of conflict here is that we've got a hologram on this station, and Rimmer is going to have to make way. And this is the kind of the opening section with the Space Corps directives, and the fact that has anyone actually physically seen them, and the it's the whole idea that Rimmer's going to have to go back to Red Dwarf because they want to use his projection unit, which again is like another play on this. I'm still not quite sure they're quite figuring out this this the actual idea of how Rimmer is actually projected, are they? Because he seems like he's going back to the ship so they can use his projection unit. Does that mean then that he's on Red Dwarf and they're just using projection unit when he's on Starbug, which then when he goes back to Red Dwarf, they just transfer him over? So it's that in itself is a scientific thing, which they're not quite there. We're not quite at hard light yet. So they're still trying to work that out a little bit.
Yeah, for me, I did feel like the conversation about Landstrom potentially time sharing with Rimmer and them, having her on sometimes and Rimmer on other times completely made no sense. If they were going to be behaving like that, surely they'd have been doing that already with Captain Hollister or their current doctor or a science officer or someone basically more useful than Rimmer, and literally every other crew member is likely to be more useful than Rimmer. The whole point of Rimmer is that he was there to keep Lister sane, not to be a useful member of the crew. So that did kind of grate with me. I didn't spot it at the time, but on our rewatch for this, I was like, really? That's actually a bit bollocks in it.
I mean, my understanding was that it was Holly who kind of made that decision based on his kind of calculations on who would be the correct member of the crew to keep Lister sane. Yeah, and I mean, part of me is always thinking that it was always Holly's decision that Rimmer was there. I mean, I don't. It's never been clear, has it? Because there's a good there's a good side plot of series 1 is Lister trying to find the discs of the other crew members.
Yeah.
But then it was Rimmer that hid them, whereas it's kind of it is. They never really fully work out the issue with that, and then they never really explained how they managed to get 2 Rimmers, did they? In Me Squared or no? So I mean, again, I know, like Mark's always said that you try not to get too invested in the continuity of something, but the hologram tech.
Yeah, I know what you mean, but this one in particular, because it was so fundamental to the whole premise of Red Dwarf that Holly believed that Rimmer was the right choice for reasons that weren't crew-related, they were personal-related to Lister. It was such an important part of the establishment of the crew of Red Dwarf. It just felt wrong to me, that's all.
Yeah, I mean, if you were to write it again, you'd find a way to have Rimmer as the only hologram disc left, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
If it was that the discs were actually all stored in part of where the actual stasis, where the actual leak took place, and Rimmer's holodisc for some reason survived, but then you'd have problems with the fact that because Holly would then have to not choose Rimmer, and by choosing Rimmer, it's giving him agency. So it's difficult in that way because you don't want it to be a happy circumstance. You want it to be Holly's doing it for a reason.
Headcanon. Okay, as we're talking about, I've just got like different things in my head, and I think part of it's kind of like the idea that technology is outdated again. So like a modern day reboot of Red Dwarf, should have thought, would probably wouldn't have physical discs for each copied personality. They would be on like a hard drive or the cloud, and it could be an easy thing saying that either that Holly decided that one, personality wise, Lister Rimmer is the closest that is the crew member that will keep Dave sane the most. Also, it could be the case that it'll always have to be a higher or a superior officer. So, like, I could see like a fallback at the Jupiter Mining Corporation saying that in an event of a catastrophe and some of the bridge crew gets killed, then the highest available officer that they have the personality for becomes a hologram to take command. That makes sense. That makes sense. And then Lister cannot physically change the crew member because Rimmer is a higher rank than him. So a higher ranking officer can only change the hologram. That makes sense.
Yeah, so you're saying that basically that they're the bottom two in the ship, but Lister can't do it because it's not physically allowed. Holly can't do it. It's got to be because she's not a registered crew member. It has to be a registered crew member. But then the only person that he can actually activate is someone at Rimmer's level.
Yeah, or like say, for example, if I don't know, Olaf Peterson turned up, Olaf will probably have the ability to change whoever's the hologram is, but can't do it. But no, actually, doesn't matter.
Yeah.
No, actually, no.
It's like a hierarchy.
Yeah.
Whatever's in the tree. Yeah. Yeah, that would be interesting. One thing I forgot to mention, actually, just going back to the episode, is the cat and the yes, sir. Changing Ocean Scouter now, sir. Which is absolutely amazing. And I like the way they set that up with the fact that, Crichton, if he'd done it a different way, you can imagine them just going, I'll launch a Scouter. But it's because Rimmer actually went, whoa, hold on a second. I'm the one in charge. I'm going to do it. And then they just kind of looking up in the sky and doing all this non-compliant stuff. And I think it's again, it gives you straight away, if you haven't seen this episode before or this series before, an indication of who Rimmer is. There's someone that they don't. But I know there'll be more depth to it, but it gives you, just from an on the surfacing, that they're willing to go against Rimmer because he can be a bit obnoxious like that.
I think it also very much establishes how much of a wind-up merchant the cat has become. And that's much...
Aye, sir.
And that's very much Lister's influence, because the cat was more selfish catty in the early series, but he's become closer friends with Lister, and I think some of Lister's less socially acceptable behaviour has kind of rubbed off on the cat. And again, this is about character development and how the crew have progressed in their friendship. The whole Lister winding up Rimmer thing, the cat's observed it, and the cat has now joined in, and the cat's enjoying it just as much as Lister does. And it's done nice and slowly, where it kind of increases, but it's gone from the cat hating Rimmer to the cat kind of being sort of fond of him, but really enjoying winding him up.
So here's a point, and it's a very good point that Rimmer makes. Why is it only Rimmer that gets quoted Space Corps directives? On that same method, the fact that Crichton is the one that he always does it to Rimmer, but never to Lister or to the cat or to even Holly or anyone.
Here's a question that I was going to ask as well, because there's the ongoing joke that Rimmer gets them wrong. Has he actually quoted them wrong yet, or is it from this episode? I can't.
No, it's just been mentioned that the Space Corps directives, so they haven't got to the point where he's getting them wrong yet. So I think this is the continuity of he's got the book now and he keeps. Yeah.
No, I never realised that. It's made me like this episode even more, and just like appreciating him. So the new gag is Rimmer misquoting them because he ended up reading that. God, I like this. Man, this episode's great, isn't it?
Yeah. So he gets this. Now he has the Space Corps directives, and obviously he's memorised.
I tell you what, a joke that they did miss here. He got like a shitty little folder. What they should have done was when he put his hand out, they should have given him a massive, great tome that knocked him over. That would have been a good gag. And I was expecting it, and it didn't happen.
Yeah. Or the saying that goes, "Oh, it's quite small," or going, "No, sir, that's the index." Or something like that.
Exactly, Matt. Perfect.
Yeah, that's the index, and then he goes, and then these are the books, and Holly, and then you suddenly see like a massive amount of, I don't know, Encyclopedia Britannica style collection or tree knowledge.
Just fills up the whole of Starbuck.
Yes, yeah.
So Yeah, that would be that is a missing gag that should have happened. That's definitely in the rewrite of this when they remake the Red Dwarf a quarantine movie.
We don't want remakes. We don't want remakes. Fuck remakes.
Get the Americans on. I'm sure they'll do a good job.
I will bite
right.
you.
Yes, sir.
Aye, sir. So as I say, so Crichton seems to be the only one that quotes at Rimmer for them. They don't exist, but then they do. And then we get Crichton going back to the point of nasty piece of work. He's a smee, which again was nice to see that come back.
Again, playing on continuity.
Yeah.
I think that Rimmer's absolutely right that Crichton has changed. I don't agree that he's become nasty. I don't think he's deliberately mean, although perhaps I do a little bit now you've pointed out that he quotes Space Corps directives only at Rimmer. But he definitely has changed. And again, that's more continuity of being encouraged to break his program, discover his personality, try and understand rebellion, and eventually accidentally become a bit tetchy.
Tetchy. Nice use of the word there. We might talk about tetchy later. So they go down to the space station, very alien style, and Lister wipes off the dust off the board and sees that it's a viral research department. It's most girls' danger. Biosuits must be worn, and then you get the warning triangle. But what for me makes it a great moment, and it's probably underplayed, is when Crichton's talking. This is one of the reasons why I like Crichton so much. He says, it outperforms the 346. It's the best budget model.
Okay, so professionally, I am a IT support technician. I won't say where for or the environment, but when you try and make small talk when something's rebooting, and yeah, is
that when you switch it off and on again?
Yeah, and when you're waiting for it to come on again to see if it works, the small talk you make, and if you're not too familiar with the person you're speaking to, because it's like a small-ish place to work at, so you pretty much know each of the member staff. But if there's someone you're not too familiar with and you can't really you start making small talk and stuff, and kind of like trying to break the silence, you'll just start making small talk and stuff like Crichton has been saying. I have said on occasion, like, oh yeah, Windows, blah 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 blah, and yeah, and it just makes me smile when he starts making that small talk, because that does happen.
It's a really nice familiar gag about awkward small talk that works really nicely. And even if it's someone you know well, if you're explicitly waiting for something and there's a pause, and you could have a million things in common with someone, but when you weren't expecting to talk, then having to talk, it's just so very human, this kind of... It's what sitcoms do best, and I feel like that's a very sitcom-y moment, whereas we have had quite a lot of heavy sci-fi going on in the rest of Series 5.
Wait, that's also, I'm going to amaze Matt here as well, the fact of some continuity, because the language of Crichton is very similar to Inquisitor when he says, well, if I could just beg your indulgence for a few seconds more. We're in Inquisitor when he says effectively the same line, but it's like, could I just possibly distract you for a few seconds? It's the same line. It's pretty much the same line. And I just like that that's within his programming. And just the fact that, he's taking time to warm up and he's giving it a shake. He's knocking it like everyone would do when you think it's not working. Let's knock it. Let's get it a bit. It's not working. Let's knock it harder.
I always have a memory. I was in year 12 or year 13 ICT lesson, and my friend next to me, his monitor had started shaking. So, but this was it was still one of these massive TFT monitors, about 15-inch screens, but with the diode in it and the light bulb and stuff. And it's like going, sir, it's not working. And our teacher, who's also the head of IT, walks over, picks up the monitor, slams it on the base CPU, and he starts working again, and then just walks off. I have still yet, in about 15 years of working in IT support, Man used to be in a position to try that.
Oh man,
This scene,
and I do.
Sorry.
Yeah, go on.
This scene,
No, it's like you carry on.
This scene also has, quite rare for Series 5, a quotable Red Dwarf. For me, I like, and we're going to live. I tend to do, and we're going to pause, and then whatever we're going to do as part of my general way that I speak, and that I didn't realise that I had taken it from Red Dwarf until we rewatched Quarantine. So that was a surprise quotable dwarf. And I think that might be the first one of Series 5 that has been an explicit quotable dwarf that I definitely use. I'm a little bit disappointed there's not been more quotable dwarves.
Yeah, well, we discussed that last time, but I just love the fact, and obviously, I think that ensemble now that you get Lissa going, we're a real Mickey Mouse operation, aren't we? It's like it's just like we're going to give up trying to look like it's this really kind of good sci-fi. You know, we're the crew. We're going to do this. It's like we're crap. I mean, look at us. We can't even get the right battery for this machine. You know, and I do like the fact they use Martian as well. I thought that was a nice little touch that they use Martian power packs. But what did you make to the Mickey Mouse and Betty Boo gag then?
I feel like that's held up. That reference, everybody's still heard of Mickey Mouse, and Betty Boo has become even more obscure than she was at the time. So, in a way, it's a more extreme example these days.
We come across something that will come back, as Matt alluded to. We come across the viruses as well, the positive viruses. As a concept, Matt, just in general, because it's the first time it's come up, what do you make to the actual concept of it? It's and its overall kind of thing of sexual magnetism and look and everything else that came with it, and they obviously will use in future.
It's something that I think will probably, technically, theoretically, could happen. I mean, I think as I mentioned last episode, like science fiction could theoretically be reality at some point, because we're at a point in history where another generation science fiction is reality. So all you have to do is like watch episodes of The Next Generation, and they're basically, or DS9, and they're carrying iPads, and typing stuff in. But the concept of like positive viruses, I always thought was quite interesting, because again, we are effectively 3 million years in the future. There are probably and artificial intelligences are probably still creating stuff whenever. I think there's a stat that usually gets played, said that computing is like constantly exponential growth, and like it's doubling every few years, and it's getting to the point where like we're going to get to a point where computing power and people working out stuff is going to be instantaneously doubling every millisecond. So like the fact that they managed to create these kind of luck viruses, or positive viruses, to kind of promote positive stuff, I think is whatever's possible. I mean, again, referring to the current global situation, I mean, like, and like the strides they're doing with like vaccines, and suddenly the amount of money it's poured into that's been based on decades of research that's just been sped up because it's been needed. And one of the more exciting things I think that's probably going to have an impact on that is that the research that's happened to develop these like vaccines for the COVID viruses will probably have another impact when they start to try and develop further like medication or vaccines for whatever. So like, yeah, so I think it's entirely possible, and the concept is sound. So like one day we could have a virus that, I don't know, makes me a lot better at conveying my thoughts on a podcast. So
oh man,
that would be great, wouldn't it? But no, I think you're right, because if you think, I mean, I'm not by any means an epidemiologist or anything like that at all, but
should have been Kurt. He had one job.
I should have been. I had one job to do and just failed in that miserably. But they're talking about some of the vaccines that they've used for COVID, for example, that, that they might have, the way that, obviously, the amount of money they've poured into it to get, us during 2020 and 2021 to get to a point where we've got vaccination programs and the like, that a lot of this technology was on its way anyway, but may have been 10 years in the making. But because of the sheer need for it, it sped that up. And, as Matt was saying there'll be knock-on effects from this, like there has been for, when we went to the moon and, technology was developed from that and stuff. So the fact that, this race to get the vaccine and some of the theoretical stuff behind the scenes and has been proven now that this may well help vaccination programs or things we're not even expecting right now, in the next 5 to 10 years. And that's all because of the money that's been thrown into it. So that it's really an interesting concept that, science in this case is on positive viruses and, and is that an interesting science fiction trope? And I don't think I've ever seen anything like it in any other science fiction TV program as well, which I could be wrong, but it seems to be quite a unique idea as well.
I like it, but I don't think it's something we're going to see anytime soon. I don't think there are positive viruses, I don't think.
So no sexual magnetism, Mark?
I don't need that virus, thank you very much.
And you might be riddled with it, that's what I'm saying.
Well, maybe that's why I'm so good.
So here's a question for you. If they needed to sustain your life because of the holovirus that Landstrom has, why freeze herself?
They did cover that, didn't they? They said that she that's because her life expectancy had been reduced, that it helped, even though she was a hologram, it did that, I think. Didn't they? They did give it some kind of wibbly-wobbly resolution that I didn't really buy.
I don't know. I don't know if it actually... I know they were saying that obviously the end of life was near. They had to sort of delay it, but it just felt a bit strange that you would freeze a hologram. And the fact, because she's not there, is she?
No.
I don't know. I think it's effectively like sticking a phone in a freezer. Because what you're... Is it the light beam that they're freezing? I don't... Again, this comes back to whether the show really understands its own internal mythology in regards to how the holograms work.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because Lister basically says that's why she was in a stasis pod. Precisely, Lansom was preserving the little lifespan remains. So it says it drains the victim's life force. So that's why she was in the stasis pod. So I'm assuming it. Right, okay. So the stasis pod, because she has a presence. The stasis pod, it's not them freezing, is it? It's they're being frozen in time. So time's not moving.
Yeah, I think that
makes more sense.
I think that's it.
That makes more sense.
So it's less. So it's not cryogenic. So my mind in terms of stasis has always been warped by the best movie ever made, Demolition Man. In terms of of how someone who is frozen in time being literally frozen in cryogenesis. And I've only just realised now that I don't think we've ever, in terms of Lister being in a stasis pod, I don't think it's not actually, they're not actually referred to, it's frozen, but it's never actually looks like he's actually frozen. He's just, they've just stuck him out of time. And if that's the case, then you could say that that's exactly what's happened with the technology of the light beam for Langstrom.
Yeah.
So it's less frozen. So you're not sticking a phone in a freezer. You're just putting it in something that changes time around it. So okay, that makes sense to me now.
And that explains the kind of the stasis leak, isn't it? When they go back to that time, because that leak is actually leaking through. They're able to go back to that time because there's a break in the fabric of space-time that allows them to do that, because that moment is frozen, so they can get access to to the thing. I'm glad I asked that question because it's now made it more sense in my head as well. So that's great.
Yeah.
I've also talked about on this podcast about the Star Trek stuff. We talked in Hollership, Matt, about how it was ribbing Star Trek. It was kind of like gently nudging it with the Russian accents and things like that. And it was very much a Star Trek Next Generation, punked with some like William Shatnerisms with the captain and stuff like that. In this episode, we seem to be going through an alien stroke Star Wars because there's a comment about not shooting straight as well.
I love that line.
Yeah.
Again, though, I think that's not only it's a stormtrooper gag. Again, it's also a commentary on it's an ongoing payment joke where like because they actually have been shot at. And rules of fiction mean that you can't actually hit your protagonists with anything lethal. So
it's a bit meta, and it's clearly meta, and the cat is perfect to be meta. But one thing I wanted to mention about the laser eyes is it really does highlight the difference of how well the models have aged compared to the CG. The bolts from the eyes are crap. The models are fucking beautiful.
Yeah.
I'm nice to see you've got a strong opinion on that.
Am I wrong?
No,
you're not wrong. No, you're not wrong.
It's early 90s CG, isn't it? Well, it's the early 90s British CG.
Are we talking, is it the early 90s? When was this episode aired? Oh, it was 1992, wasn't it? Because we said it at the top of the hour. Yeah, that might be a callback to last week.
It's poor. It's not, it is that. It doesn't matter. And you kind of expect crap CG. But like I say, you compare it to the models and yeah, it's another world, isn't it?
Right. So this is a question I have as well for Holly. You mentioned last week, Matt, about the Crichton's taking up most of the screen time now for explanations.
Yeah.
I think we talked about that last week. I think it was either Hollership or the second episode, which memory mistake is failing me right now. What was the second episode of season 5?
Inquisitor.
Inquisitor. There's a scene that was cut where Rimmer comes. It was Hollership because it was when Rimmer comes back to the ship after he fails his meld, so he comes back on. And there's a scene that was cut there where Rimmer speaks to Holly. In this episode, we get Holly and Rimmer conversation. And Holly is quite distinctively different to what we've known her before as the third season Holly compared to now. She seems very has quite a big attitude towards Rimmer. And I think for me, if they'd had the scene in Hollership still on there, that this would make more sense. But it still feels a bit like Holly's just has a bit too much attitude here. And I don't know if that's Hattie Hayridge coming through or if it's just the way it's written. It probably doesn't mean anything to you at all. But did you feel that there was there's a slight change in the character of Holly at this point?
I don't know, actually. I think it's... I don't know. I think it's because as I said previously, I think that Holly's slowly been not phased out, but she's not in it as much as Norman Lovett's version of the character was. That's not a slight. I don't think that's a slight on the writers just not giving Hattie Hayridge the material. It's because of the presence of Crichton.
Yeah.
Which has had a knock-on effect. Because whenever Hattie Hayridge has gotten something really good, it's paid off really well. I didn't notice that. I think it's more a case that I think she's only there for Rimmer to sound off on, in a way that like the Talkie Toaster or the Scutters have been in previous episodes where they need someone not of the core cast. And it feels real bad to say that about Holly, but that's what it feels like at the moment. But again, I think it's the case that I think it's how the rest of the characters sometimes react to him, and I think I don't know. I mean, it's interesting you asked that. I've never noticed it. I didn't notice it when I watched it, but
I think that Holly has got sassier in Series 5 than she had been previously. I think that Norman Lovett had like a dry contempt, whereas I think Hattie's has been explicitly contempt. For example, in The Inquisitor, she calls Lister a worthless space bum, and I don't feel like that is a joke that they would have used with Norman.
In this episode, you've got I've done 3 complete checks. It's ready to launch. Is the bit, but even the way she says escape pod checked and standing by, it's like, oh, I'm having to do that. And then later in the episode where they're on the in Starbug and they're coming to dock, she says, "When you're quite finished, chaps, we've got a problem with the cargo bay doors." It's like, I'm not sure I really understand. It feels like it just feels a bit awkward, and I can't quite place it.
I'm wondering whether they are trying to figure out how to keep Holly as part of the ensemble. I'm trying, because I think they're trying to work out how she fits as a character, and I think we are seeing them work out that the character is not working as it had done in the past. And I think it might be a case that they're trying to figure out how she fits into everything. And I think, as we've seen Norman Lovett appear in later episodes, he fits in, but he's never a permanent. Well, no, actually, he's in season 8. He's in series 8, isn't he? He's in all series 8, isn't he?
Yeah, he's in season 8. Yeah,
but that series 8's got. He's another fish in a much bigger pond of characters. So the screen time gets divided up in a lot more different ways. I don't know. I think from what you're saying, Kurt, I do feel as if it's a case that they are trying to work out the evolution of the character to try and give her a unique sense of how she interacts with the crew. But I'm assuming, again, I think they just can't get it right. So so I think that might be it.
It felt a bit bolshy, I think, in this episode. It feels a bit more bolshy than it has been in the past.
Yeah.
And if they, as I say, they cut that scene in Hollership, which at the time when I was thinking about it felt a little bit out of character. And I think it's just by going through it episode by episode, I was like, I can see there's something not quite landing here. And I often, before series 5, I just thought she's just getting less and less screen time, and she'll be just eventually written out with the show.
I think it's just...
But it's just really strange.
I think the lack of screen time and lack of exposition from Holly is simply because Crichton's more portable.
Yeah, I mean, take last week, for example. Last week, that Simoon conversation, this is why I mentioned it last week, is that could easily have just been given to Holly. It didn't need Crichton to say it. It didn't need him to say it. It could have easily just been transposed over and for Holly to say it. But it just wasn't, and there might be things behind the scenes as well. Was she available, etc.? I don't know personally, but it just feels like there's just this, as you say, it's like it just feels like a spare part now, and they're not quite sure where to fit her in. Yeah. I just find it really interesting that it kind of comes to fruition here, because the way that she's delivering the lines is kind of a lot more bullshit, a lot more like, kind of, as you say, it's kind of just quite strange in some ways.
And she's hardly in this episode. You'd think that she could override Rimmer in some cases because he's insane. Yeah. But she doesn't, and she's not referenced for the vast majority of the episode. And that's probably because it would ruin the plot. But in theory, you would think that the ship's computer would have protocols.
Yeah, but Rimmer has been known to override those before, hasn't he?
True.
When she couldn't turn herself off. So it would be easy enough to write that in because it's happened before.
Good point.
So what about when Rimmer actually does get infected? We get the he's dead and dead and dead all over you, which is one of my favourite lines. But but everything else that happens around that scene is just completely obliterated by the way that Chris Barry says marvelous. It's just absolutely brilliant.
It is. And I whined about the laser eyes, but I did feel like with the tech that they had, the way they subtly infected him, blink and you'd miss it with that just little bit of electric. I thought that was really, really nicely done, actually. Blink and you miss it, or even if you didn't, it was so insignificant for like half a second. It's only when he gets the virus later on, you're like, oh shit, that's how he got infected. And I really liked that. It was subtle. And Red Dwarf isn't normally subtle.
Yeah, and I think just before that as well is that when you see the pettiness of Rimmer when he starts saying like, but yes, but if you refer to Space Core Directive, blah 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 blah, and like it's just it continues to start paying off, and he's in perfect character, and he's again in character to Rimmer, and you can kind of see, and considering I think sometimes that perhaps I think Rimmer can be, I think is almost justified in how he feels he's been treated. Like they kind of do have like written him off at times, and he does have a chip on his shoulder, and the kind of, I mean, it's probably because he's also carried himself off as a bit of a prick at time, bit of a prick about it. But they do seem to. I can kind of see why he kind of acted the way he did just before the infection kicks in, and locks him in the quarantine.
Yeah, I don't feel like that was part of the virus. I think that was very much Rimmer being petty.
Yeah.
I possibly do think that if he hadn't been infected with the virus, I do think that perhaps Rimmer probably wouldn't have let them in there for the full time. He probably would have just given them a few more days for them to come out, and then just let them out about, I don't know, like 4 or 5 days.
It was that was the intention. I took it as that the intention was that he's gonna play it by the book because to get one back up on Crichton, and he wouldn't have done it for that long. Yeah, but it did happen. But before that does happen, before we do get back to Red Dwarf, Landstrom actually expels her life force, and like I said at the top of the hour with the telekinetic abilities, which will come into play later in the episode. And she burns herself out. But did you catch what Crichton says? And it's a lovely moment. Did you catch what he was saying when they were going around being chased by her?
No.
Okay, so he says, Crichton's like sort of explaining out Crichton saying, unfortunately, it requires so much energy, it drains the victim's life force. That's why she was in the stasis pod. Precisely, Landstrom preserving what little she remains. Lister then says, well, if she's running out of time, maybe we could just give her the runaround. And Crichton then says, theoretically, a sound notion, sir. Unfortunately, she's about to do one of those double things, but he doesn't get there because Landstrom takes over the comment. So it's like another play on like Crichton's character that he says, unfortunately, we haven't got anywhere to run around, or she can't do whatever, etc., etc. It's very much like Crichton's totally formed now in my head. It's like he's had lines that he said which are similar to other lines before, which aren't the same things. He's not repeating stuff. He's doing all his two options, the Rocky Pants sort of stuff. But then he's also like saying, he's also being the one that's saying, a good idea, sir, but and he then goes on to say something else. But Landstrom on this occasion, interrupts him before she dies. Yeah,
I think Landstrom, the actor doesn't get very much screen time, but the screen time she does, she's superb in it. And yeah, I really like the character, even though she doesn't last very long.
So we go back onto Starbug. We start talking about the positive viruses, like we said. It gets the cards, shuffles the decks, 13 to 1, 222 to 1, 5,225 to 1, which was great. And then we get the dart in the bullseye, which is one of my favourite moments. And I don't know why it tickles me so much, but it's just the way that Crichton goes, I don't know why. It just gets me every single time. It's like, just throw that die over your left-hand shoulder behind you. It's a great comic site gag.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So Rimmer overrides the doors. We get to Bay 47. We have to go back to Bay 47 where we have to go to quarantine. Rimmer says, as you mentioned, no intention of contracting that disease. And behind the scenes, the actual quarantine area is just a redress of the ship's quarters, of Rimmer and Lister's quarters. And we get our first boys from the dwarf.
We do.
So which is great, isn't it?
Boys from the dwarf.
And the hand thing as well. One thing that I did do in this episode, after Rimmer had told them what their entertainment was going to be, it was like the third or fourth reference we've had to Reggie Dixon. So I did have a little looky look of who Reggie Dixon was. And it turns out he's real.
Blackpool guy.
Yeah, he's an organist who played at the Tower Ballroom in Blackpool for over 50 years. So this guy, you know, he wasn't David Bowie releasing records, but he was a very well-known musician for a very old-fashioned style of performance. But this guy was a performer for 50 years, and I'm kind of glad that he's almost commemorated in Red Dwarf in this way. Yeah,
no, I think because of Red Dwarf's nature of being a Northwest comedy TV show as well, that it places it in our area especially. It's a lovely moment, and it's just nice that they've done that. I mean, isn't he like sort of the biggest selling organist as well, or something like that?
Yeah. I've just looked at his Wikipedia. So there's a bit on his discography. Between 1932... sorry, I'm just gone back to Picky Disc Mode for a second. Between 1932 and 1958, Reginald Dixon released some 296 records on 78 RPM discs, in which the table below lists. It does not include releases on 45, 33.5 or cassette releases.
That's a lot of releases.
One of the, in the little blurb that occurs at the start of the Wikipedia article, during his 50-year career, he was one of the top-selling artists. His prolific output ranking alongside that of Victor Sylvester and Bing Crosby.
Wow!
So he's probably one of these his output must be he's probably one of these who are kind of like either underrated or he's just put so much out there that he's not ranked above.
It's easy listening, isn't it? Nobody who's not into easy listening could name you a single easy listening artist, but easy listening artists make a fuck ton.
Yeah.
Would you get by, Mark, on the dinner, supper and teas that the boys will have to eat for the next so many days?
So I'm vegetarian, we know this, but I do not like sprouts. I would not be happy with that cuisine.
No.
Again, going back to my conversation about how tight-fisted the Jupiter Mining Corporation are in terms of the entertainment facilities for their staff. Again, it's the case that they've had all this stuff that they can give people, but it's just all the crap stuff that's really cheap to buy. So that's why you've got the painting video and the knitting magazine and all that kind of rubbish.
Yeah, and the completed puzzle.
I do like the callback where Lister starts making crocheted hats.
Yes.
Well, just before that, Rimmer, this is the first indication that something's... I don't know if there is a slight inkling here of that there is the virus is starting to take hold, because it's just the way it says, oh, why? I think I've got that down for every meal. Oh, no, I tell a lie. It is every meal. And I do think there's maybe an element of Rimmer being Rimmer, but also starting to creep in at that point.
Yeah.
When we come back when we come to see the crew back in quarantine, Crichton is finished panel beating his head. So As you say, the croquet hats are there. We get the whole take it easy thing. And tetchy. Tetchy is my quotable Red Dwarf. I use the word tetchy so much. You're a bit tetchy today. I do, and it's all because of Red Dwarf. It's the word that I think I've used the most. I mean, smeghead and smeg and whatever, yeah, fair enough. But I think in normal, everyday conversation that I wouldn't have even realised it was from Red Dwarf because it's just in my vocabulary is tetchy.
It's a good word, isn't it?
You're tetchy. It's the way it's his Scouse accent as well, which really
Tetchy.
brings it to the fore.
Tetchy. Don't you say sir. Don't you say sir. You know what happens when you say sir. Oh, no, you've done it, sir. No, you've done it, sir. I like how polite Crichton is when he's really pissed off. No, you said it, sir. Please don't say it, sir.
Yeah. And again, they'll use that again in future, won't they? Where there's certain things he'll do, which is still polite, but he's like, no, hold me back, stuff like that, where he's not wanting to go for the fight, but he has to like sort of play up to it.
Another thing from this scene that I very much identify with, and I think everyone's got like little pet peeves, like for example being called tetchy or being corrected or whatever. But the one that resonated the most with me is the Frankenstein thing. I get so angry when people who clearly haven't read the book call the monster Frankenstein. And I get that people don't like being corrected, but if you've not read the fucking book, don't reference it. You
see, I take it from a slightly different viewpoint. Yeah, I take it from a slightly different viewpoint that every time someone mentions it, I always go back to this scene in my head. So I've got the tetchy thing that I use all the time, but every time it says, oh, it's Frankenstein, I always think quarantine. So this moment is so pivotal for a lot of things that actually happened. So like tetchy, as I say, the Frankenstein stuff, and you got the feckles, hackles, shackles bit as well. But apparently this whole scene in this quarantine section was meant to be like a 3-minute segment in total. And for some reason, the entire crew were having difficulty remembering the lines, and it actually got quite full on. And like they were saying, I think it took what should have taken like 10 minutes to do, took over an hour. And the edit, depending on who you speak to, actually took between 1 and 4 days. So it was such a difficult one to do. Now, I've always wondered this question, and I don't know if it's something that you've picked up or not. Is the cat, when he says, when he's talking to Rimmer, when we do see Rimmer in the Gangan dress, when he says, don't go to him, is that just a repeated line and an edit, or does he say it separately and it's a different recording? Do you know what I mean? There's like a line where he's saying something along the lines of like, don't rise to him. And he says it again about 15 seconds later. And I think it's the same recorded bit. I think it's just been replayed again.
I'm not the one to ask on ADR. I'm crap at spotting it. I always have been. And people tell me that was really obviously ADR. And I'm like, was it? So, Matt.
I don't think it's not necessarily ADR. I think they've used the exact same scene and replayed it as like just as the next bit.
I don't know, actually. I've not noticed.
It really, every time I see it, I keep thinking, have they just repeated that scene again just as part of the edit? Because it's don't rise to him. And then Rimmer will say something else and he says, don't rise to him. It's like, that's exactly the same, said the same way. And it looks like Kat does the same hand movement as well.
Oh, no.
So it's one to look out for next time.
I didn't notice that at all.
But again, which is one of my favourite Crichton moments of all time, before we do see Rimmer, it's like, why? Open the handkerchief and take a look into the contest. What are you expecting? A Turner seascape? A face of the Madonna? An undiscovered sonnet? It's just his attitude is absolutely perfect at that moment. And he's right. There is people that do that. They actually blow the nose and look and open the handkerchief and have a look at what they've developed, aren't they? And it's a typical I don't know about you, but I've seen people do that. Have you seen people?
Oh
do
yeah.
That?
And I'm like, why do you need to know?
They say that we're going to have to get through this now. Matt and I have seen an episode on the Dave series where there's some synchronicity going on. This one's not perfect, and I think they were just doing the best of a bad situation from the sounds of it. So this is not a diss at them, because I think from the sounds of it, this whole scene was difficult to record, so they've just done the best of what they could. But it's not quite there, isn't it? Because I don't think Danny John Jules says the right words as well. So Crichton and Kat are trying to say the same thing at the same time. It just doesn't quite come off.
But what I will say about this scene is the reveal of the dress. Obviously, we've all seen this 100 times, so it has lost its impact. But if you take a step back and think about the first time, if you didn't know and you hadn't seen any of this before and you hadn't been spoiled, the reveal of the dress would have been something special, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely. Because not only are we aware of it, you can actually see it before the reveal. But if you're watching this for the first time, you're not looking out for it, so you wouldn't necessarily register it at that time because you're too busy like engrossed in the show. Yeah. Whereas we can see it when you come back and you're waiting for that action. You can see him; he's not quite in pitch black on the reveal. But but again, as you say, I remember vividly seeing that reveal and howling with laughter. I do remember this episode so vividly.
Oh yeah.
It's the moment that also where in the story we realise that the holovirus has got Rimmer and it's affected him in a way. And again it's like one of those visual gags, and I think as well it's just like showing that Chris Barry's up for more or less anything. And to be fair, it's not the most extravagant of costumes he'll be wearing this series.
No,
it isn't.
No, so I think it's gearing up for goes like. I think it's just gearing the audience for the type of stuff that Chris Barry's willing to wear for his art or his craft. But it
is the Chris Barry series, isn't it? Series
you know
5.
what? I was just thinking that. I mean, when you think about it, it
does feel like
so you've got Holoship was very Rimmer-centric. Inquisitor ends up with again based on the fact that it's going back to the first series and him being charged for the manslaughter of the crew of Red Dwarf. Then you've got Terraform, and then you've got here, and then you've got well, he's not the main focus of Back to Reality.
No.
Yeah, that's more of an ensemble one. And I think there's probably a wider ensemble focus on Demons and Angels, but this is very Rimmer focused. Yeah, there's a lot of Rimmer. I mean, like then again, like there's what 2 or 3 episodes to start series 4 that were very Crichton centric as well.
True. True. I do feel like, sorry, go on.
And I was going to say, and it's like the series where you have like 3 cat centric Oh, hang on.
Oh. I didn't see where you were coming from there. And I went, okay.
You hurt me. You wound me.
That's one of the few genuine criticisms that I have on the show is that they've given the cat short shrift when it comes to having some focused episodes. There's hardly any.
Yeah. I'm always going on about quotable dwarf.
Yeah.
So there was a line that Rimmer said here that isn't quotable dwarf. It's not something that I have used a lot, and it hasn't become part of my general vocabulary.
But, we almost believe you.
But
something's amiss here.
This is something that I have decided I'm going to explicitly and deliberately add to my vocabulary. If someone asks me a question I don't have a good answer to, I'm going to reply with, because the king of the potato people won't let me. Because
I think
what
I might
a
have used
fucking
that.
line. What a line it is.
The king of the potato people won't let me.
It's just such a great line. And how I didn't adopt that, I don't know, because I have the same humour I had when I was 12, because I never grew up. So I'm having that. That is not quotable dwarf, but it is future quoted dwarf.
You know, I've actually used as part of that, and this is, I think, for me, this is probably one of the strongest scenes, even though they've had so much problems with it behind the scenes. For me, this is one of the strongest scenes of Red Dwarf in its entire history. It's just got so much to it. And I think have used, you mean, Mark, you've travelled 300 miles to come and see me, and you're telling me you're completely sane? You know what I mean? I'd say I do use that line a lot. You know, so that is my quotable. That's another quotable line for me. But I just love the build up to it. I love the build up to that line where it's like, you want to get 3-seater. Let's get on the 3-seater. You know, and the fact that the king of the potato people, they're doing this, and then he rhymes it all back to them. And you're telling me you're completely sane? And it makes you think, actually, he's got a point.
Yeah.
So that's, I thought that was great. And the get out is the look virus. Is anything else within this quarantine scene that you want to bring up? Do we think we've covered it quite substantially, haven't we, really?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's fine.
Keep you here for 10 years. Oh no, sorry, there is something. And it's a moment again, which is just, there's not many things in life on comedy shows where I start laughing before the thing happens. And it's before Lister says, Rimmer says, sorry, little test to see if you've gone crazy. Then he goes, like that. I just start laughing. I start laughing before he does it.
As a kid, that freaked me the fuck out. The noise that came from nowhere. Yeah, that definitely freaked me as a kid.
What I found quite interesting, again, on the tongue-tied wiki, the king of the potato people is clickable.
Brilliant.
Is it?
So I'm going to click on it, see what happens.
Click on it, see what happens.
The king of the potato people.
Do you need a 3-seater for it? Because we've got 3 people, so we're all right.
Yeah, 3-seater. 3-seater. Oh God, I'm going to start saying 3-seater as a really crap Scouse accent now. 3-seater, a 3-seater. It's mainly about the quarantine, but okay. There is a section that he appears in the magazine. There's a comic story published in the Red Dwarf's magazine issue 8 called Mr. Flibble's Surprise. Mr. Flibble flies to the planet Spud for the King of the Potato People's party. He lands on some wildlife. He hitches a ride to the castle and rapes the driver. Okay.
Wow.
Okay.
He then finds the king on his throne reading potato porn and gives him his present, a thermonuclear megadeath. Okay, that went somewhere I wasn't expecting. So,
well, we'll look forward to that on the specials between Series 5 and Series 6 then.
Okay.
I've got nothing else. I think that calls end to the episode. Okay. So we use the look virus. That was lucky. And then we get the introduction of Mr. Flibble. Mr. Flibble is an interesting character. Mr. Flibble wasn't going to be Mr. Flibble. Mr. Flibble, originally, they didn't know what it was going to be. So someone brought in a penguin glove puppet to use in the short term until they got something. And then it came to recording, they couldn't find anything, and they decided to go with Mr. Flibble. Now, isn't that interesting?
I do feel like they completely lucked out there, because obviously a lot of it is Chris Barry's talent, but Mr. Flibble was really expressive. And there was one part where when he was destroying the door with his evil eyes, and his eyes went down, and he had Mr. Flibble's eyes go down at the same time and follow what he was doing. I feel like Chris Barry made Mr. Flibble because he was a great puppeteer.
Yeah, well, this is one of the things I've got on my notes. Ventriloquism, mouth moving, actually makes it even better.
Oh, yeah.
The fact that he's not being a ventriloquist, he's just going, "Hey, my friend Ali," and he's actually mouthing it at the same time. I just think it's not all there. He's not a ventriloquist. He's not doing it perfectly, and that makes it so much better.
I agree.
But Mr. Flibble, it'll be interesting if the actual original glove puppet maker actually got any trademark or any like royalties or anything for it, because Mr. Flibble was a purchasable puppet. So that'd be interesting in itself if that became something else.
I wonder how many cosplayers have gone as Holovirus Rimmer and have a Mr. Flibble puppet with them. There must have been loads. I mean, the amount of Mr. Flibbles Chris Barry must have signed.
Right, I'm going to look on eBay now and see if I can get a Mr. Flibble.
Yeah, me too, actually.
I'll go on Etsy.
No, there doesn't seem to. There's Mr. Flibble t-shirts, but there's not an actual Mr. Flibble. How disappointing.
There's a Mr. Go to Etsy. Go to Etsy.
Oh, there's a replica. There's a couple, actually. You can get a...
This makes good radio, folks.
Yeah, let's not. I'm just wanting Mr. Flibble. Sorry, I got distracted.
I kind of want to get the one with the hex vision, because like you can...
Yeah. The Mr. Flibble replica at 48 quid.
Bloody hell. I don't think I want Mr. Flibble that much.
So telepathy and telekinesis starts to come in, which again, it's full Crichton. Crichton's, yeah, I have a medium-sized fire axe. It's like, Crichton, you're right. Yeah, I have a medium-sized fire axe in my back.
I do feel like the telepathy was added as a afterthought just so that they could make that gag with the fire axe and then have the funnies with him banging his head off the wall. But I don't care because it was funny.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, as I say at the top of the hour, that was one of the original ideas, was to have that. They just included it in this, and they had this idea, and they've included the telepathy and the telekinesis in it. So, yeah, and it's one self-determination for the Moldovan people, which, again, you know, it's that spin your nipple nuts and send me to Alaska kind of thing, isn't it? That Crichton would just come off and rhyme these weird sentences. And he does a really good, you know, because in the past, they've had like bits where I'm thinking of Rimmer, it goes, me, or when he's sucking up the penny, for example. But this is Robert Llewellyn playing Crichton, going absolutely mental, and like sort of like him just having this moment of like it's a computer meltdown. You know, his brain's completely frazzled. And I just like it, especially when he's banging his head. Another famous moment, which I think is great. And then we get to the kind of the final stages where we see Rimmer with Mr. Flibble, where he does the kind of the sooty thing.
Yeah, he does.
Because Mr. Flibble doesn't talk. It's like, ooh, we can't possibly do that. Who'd clear up the mess?
It's definitely a sooty reference. It has to be.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
But I do quite like the fact that they end up using the look virus to resolve it as well. So like and like as they're getting closer, they're just like keeps tripping up. Oh, we need this. Oh, that's stroke. Look, we got one here, and we need this.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and it's good. And again, going back to Smeg Ups, and this isn't a Smeg Up as such, but Crichton uses the word extraordinary. And throughout the show, they kind of get this running joke by the time you get back to reality, where they're going, extraordinary, which I think it must be a Murray Walker thing, potentially. I can't remember where it came from, but the fact that Crichton uses the word extraordinary in this episode just made me automatically think about that. So they defeat Rimmer. and he goes back to his normal self. And then we get the very final moment, which is their payback. So this started off as an episode about Rimmer getting his payback with Crichton on the Space Corps directives, and it turns out that it actually flips back around, and we get the standard thing of Rimmer being the one that actually ends up in that position. So we get almost like a reset, don't we? So what did you make to the final moments, Mark?
I mean, I think it absolutely had to have a reset because they'd got an insane Rimmer in a frock with a glove puppet, and I think the look virus was a nice way to get around it. But it's very Red Dwarf. You've got 2 minutes left to resolve the episode and hit the reset button. Let's get it done, and they do. But what I do love is I feel like it was fair that at the end the other three had to wear a gingham dress.
So any final thoughts from yourself, Matt?
No, I think we've covered all the stuff that's on there, because I just think that it's a great episode. It's hilarious, and I think as well, just the fact that it starts building from stuff that's happened before, and also sets up a couple of things that will happen in later series as well. I think, it's just one of these things that it's a sense of continuity didn't feel like it happened that well in terms of in British comedy. I think the only one I could perhaps think of at the top of my head was, I think at this point we'd started to perhaps get did we get the Red Dwarf special? Not the Red Dwarf, the Only Fools and Horses specials, where I think by the time they got to the end, they started doing the 50-minute specials after like the half an hour series, and that's they just pretty much committed to full on serialization at that point. But I can't from memory think of any other kind of sitcom that was built. No, Hello Hello was quite serialized as well.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, good point.
Yeah. I think it's good that it's starting to take a lot more of its kind of own continuity. Now I think it's either the next episode. It's either next episode. It might be Demons and Angels.
That is the next episode.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah, Back to Reality, the finale, isn't it?
Yeah.
I keep getting those confused. So because I won't be on this episode, but I remember watching that one, and there's a whole thing where there's a scene where Lister speaks to the cat and goes, "I've been to this gave birth to twins, blah blah blah, but I have never done them." And I'm like, and it's just like things like that that's building up on stuff. Now, I'm wondering whether part of that's trying to advertise, trying to get people who are perhaps joining in at this point and seeing, oh, that's happened. If you can, watch the previous episodes, because I think, thinking about it, I mean, from the origin stories of myself and Colin and Carl, I think a lot of us joined in around these later this era, didn't we?
Yeah.
So they're starting to reference stuff we've not seen or not had the chance to see. So that when they start building up on these things, particularly in this series, it's like kind of advertising stuff that's happened in episodes we might not have been able to watch yet. And it's like, oh yeah, this has happened, and you're like, oh, when did that happen? And and when you go back to watch it, you can kind of see what they're talking about, particularly like the twins being born and all that kind of stuff. It's something that I think I really wish the show had latched on a bit more earlier on, because I think Series 6 has even greater continuity between its episodes. I think there's like a mini arc in 6 as well. So I kind of like how that is starting to build up, and it's starting to be aware of its own continuity. So, and I think this is like the first episode I can think of where that's really happening properly, and they don't write anything off with like a really long Star Wars rip-off text. So, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So, well, for me, I think so far to date, this is now my favorite episode that we've done. I think Quarantine outstrips everything else that I've seen. There's a lot of high bars, but I just think that this has the most substance for me
in the whole show so
things
far.
That I like. Wow.
It's a pretty special episode. It definitely is. I think when we get there, I'll probably enjoy Back to Reality more. But it's so strong, so strong.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say I've not really ever thought about Red Dwarf in the viewpoint of what's my favorite episodes. I just put the episode I feel like watching the most on, and I've never really thought about a top 10 or my favorite seasons like we have done on this podcast. And I think if I put my proviso of what we've covered so far and what we've looked into and what we've divulged into it and how we reviewed it and critically analysed it, I think this one for me so far is probably my favourite.
What's telling is that quote unquote air quotes last week the recording duration barely reached under 1 hour 10 minutes. We are currently nearly at an hour and a half just talking about quarantine, and I always think that's probably. I mean, like, you can probably talk about a lot longer for episodes that are bad, but I think particularly over last week's episode, you can just tell there's a lot more to this than there was in Terraform.
So that leaves us to anyone has any final thoughts before we go into our social media.
The one thing I did think about that I didn't mention at the start was I used to work in a school of languages, and we used to kind of think about what TV shows were appropriate for people to learn English. And at the start of this episode, if you were learning English, you would learn a lot of synonyms for the word toilet.
Yeah, there's a lot with Crichton, isn't there? Crichton and Rimmer.
Captain Bogbot.
Matt, where can people find you online? Thank you again. This is your final moment on Series 5, so we'll see you back for Series 6.
Yes, sir.
But where can people find you online? Have you got anything final to say?
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Yes, you can find me pretty much on the majority of all your social medias under the word name Pick a Disc, or one word, and that just is pretty much linked to my podcast, which is where guests come on to pick a disc. It's not really that clever a name, is it, when I think about it? To talk about for whatever reason they want to, and then we chat about stuff, and I'll always forget to talk about the artwork and moan about songs that go on for too long. But yeah, feel free to follow me and give my podcast a listen if you're into music.
If you're looking for me, it's at MarkAdamsHC on Twitter and Instagram. That is mainly based on my job as a humanist celebrant. But talking about that, I also have a podcast about being a humanist celebrant. That's called Life's Milestones, at Life's Milestones on Twitter. You can also find me on Right in the Childhood, which is a podcast about retroactively looking at kids' TVs from a 20-something and a 40-something, comparing each other's old stuff. That's Right in the Childhood at RITC Pod on Twitter. I also have a podcast about the stories behind people's tattoos. That's called Ink Stories at Ink Stories Pod on Twitter and Instagram.
Excellent. You can find me on Twitter at rmuldrake. It's RMULDRAKE. Find me over on the Xcast, which is the X-Files podcast, and that's on Twitter at the X_cast. And also the Star Trek Picard podcast, which is doing a few specials until we get into any news, any new trailers, anything like that for season 2 of Star Trek Picard. And you can find that at Jean-Luc Podard, and that's the Make It So podcast. So that's the best place to find me. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you to our listeners, as always. Thank you. By all means, give us some feedback at Red Dwarf Pod, should you want to do that. And you'll be hearing some further stuff that's happening on the network, which we are all on in some degree, or a lot of degrees. But until next time, remember everyone.
Hello everyone, this is Tony, Network Chief of We Made This. As you know, our podcast network brings together a brilliant assortment of talent who talk about all kinds of pop culture content, such as the episode you just listened to, or maybe you're just about to listen to. We're not going anywhere, but we'd love to keep the lights on for even longer if you're able to support our network on Patreon. For just £2 a month, you get your name in lights and the satisfaction of knowing you're helping us produce more great audio. And for £3 a month, you'll get your name in lights, but you'll also get access to an exclusive bi-monthly podcast from the We Made This talent pool on podcasting, pop culture, and, well, you tell us. We'll take your suggestions. For less than the price of a coffee per month, you can help keep We Made This going. Just head to patreon.com/We Made This. That's patreon.com/We Made This. And get the ball rolling. Now, back to your scheduled programming. Elsewhere on We Made This. Gotham University, a Batman podcast.
God, so speaking of masks, there has been some news. It sounds like Zack Snyder is in the news again. What's going on with the masks, Jay?
My boy Zack! Just when you thought that the controversy of Zack Snyder was simmering down, he rose back up and just not only blew up the internet, not only broke the internet, he figuratively and probably literally fucked it right back into hysteria with this whole Batman news going on right now.
We dig music.
I recently watched the movie that came out recently of the book about all the black metal scene.
Oh, yes. I actually have that book.
Lords of Chaos, that's it, yeah. I watched the Lords of Chaos
That's
movie.
the one with
It's
Macaulay
really funny.
Culkin's brother in it.
Yes.
Or something like that.
It's really good.
And where they really, really pissed off Varg by casting someone Jewish to play him.
Which is always a good idea.
Yeah.
Always pissed off Varg McCann if you can, because he's a f***ing bellend. Not scared of you, Varg, even though you stabbed people fucking 27 times.
And got caught on a train with a rocket launcher at
Yeah.
one point.
He's a bit of a bellend.
A little bit racist. A little bit questionable.
Yeah, just a bit.
Uses papyrus as a font of choice.
And that's his worst crime.
He 100% is. I'm not even joking. Like, he's done some bad shit, but papyrus, unfucking acceptable.
Beautiful.
We are Starfleet, a Star Trek Discovery podcast.
Oh, look at Garrick. He looks so cute in this.
Or I'm watching an episode he's not in, and I wonder what Garrick's doing right now.
Where's
Maybe
he
I
at?
should text him and see what he's doing.
Okay,
text him, see if he's watching this. Yeah.
So are you guys like texting buddies? Do you have a group chat going?
Pretty much. Yeah. It's a bit alarming, particularly when I accidentally get CC'd on the Obsidian Order chat. But
Check out all of these shows and more on the We Made This podcast network.
Shipwrecked and Comatose, a Red Dwarf podcast, was created and produced by Mark Adams and Kurt North. You can find us on Twitter at Red Dwarf Pod, and we are part of the We Made This podcast network, which can be found online at wemadethispod.com or on Twitter at We Made This Pod.